Coach Fallon, before we dive into questions, I would love to hear just a little bit about who you are, why you do what you do, a little bit about your background and experience, and just all the things about you.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I did gymnastics for 17 years. So it was the only sport I ever did. And it was a love-hate relationship with my coaches. I mean, I love them to death. Nothing like that. But I was definitely very mental when it came to learning certain skills. I would overthink a lot. Very easy for me to get in my own head. And when I look back and think about when I was competing, I have realized that I was what stood in the way of me progressing even further. And so that's how everything started, gymnastics. And then when it came time for me to decide, going into college, what I wanted to do, I loved psychology, but I knew I wanted to do something in the performance related field. So I initially thought physical therapy, but just didn't really feel right, didn't feel like a good blend. And I think it was my intro to psych class, started talking about all the different um, ways or paths that you can go down in psychology. And so I heard sports psychology at mental performance. And so immediately I was like, wait a minute, like I can combine my love for sports with psychology. And so I started researching, what do I have to do? What degrees do I need to have? Um, and so I did just that, went to school with sports psychology in mind. And really the passion behind it is from my experience of knowing what it's like to have mental blocks, to have challenges, and really there's a lot that goes into having a mental block. But in my case, it mainly coming from me. So now I feel like that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I know what that's like and I know how frustrating it can be. And I don't want other athletes, whether they're gymnasts or, regardless of what sport they play or do, there's us as, resources as mental performance coaches now to help athletes work through that, which is something I wish I had when I was competing. But to be honest, wasn't, it was probably a thing, the field, but it's still growing and expanding. And so, yeah, I think it would have helped me tremendously. But, it's kind of where I'm at now. It's why I'm here, why I do what I do.
Yeah, I love that. And if it's okay, I'm going to get you to share a little bit more about kind of your experience because you are so right. These mental game skills that we are teaching in that sports psychology world, all of the tools and tricks and techniques, and there's so many to help build that mental toughness and those mental game skills. But
Right.
they apply, right? They apply whether you're a cheerleader or gymnast or a dancer or a wrestler or football or baseball or whatever the sport may be. But these are also life skills. And I know you in your current life, in your current athletic endeavors, you probably use a lot of your mental tools as a competitive athlete today.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you have military, I mean, you've worked with a lot. So I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of the ways and the different sports and places that you've applied those mental game skills and tools.
Yeah. So for me, after I stopped, so I think it was my junior year of college, I did club gymnastics. I wanted to have the balance of still competing and being a part of it, but I also wanted to be just a normal college student. So I had an injury, and at that point, I was like, okay, I'm only getting older. I mean, of course, I did PT, I did rehab, I did all the things, but from that point, I just decided that I was just going to call it quits. And I just started going to the gym. And for me, it didn't, I needed something to train for, something to compete for. And so one of my good friends at the time, she is a personal trainer still today, but she did bodybuilding shows. And so I traveled with one to her, and just I loved the environment and how the process isn't always fun, but just like come show day, like seeing how fun or how much fun she was having. I was like, well, you know what? Like, I think this is something I can try, or at least do it once to see if I liked it. And I did, and I did a show, and I still do it today. And so with mental game skills, I mean that, gosh, I mean, talk about setting goals and being disciplined. And um, I think, something that we've talked about is this idea of motivation, and is it something that you always have, or is it more so discipline? So a lot of mental game skills that I might not have realized at the time were on the table, or like things that I were using I most definitely used. And I think those skills in particular, or mental game skills, really helped me because it's very physically draining, let alone mentally draining. And you hear athletes or competitors all the time say, like, while bodybuilding is physical, it is more so mental. Can get yourself out of the trenches mentally to physically go and do what you have to do? So for me in my personal life, that's how to this day I'm using the skills. But even in my experience working with the military, I mean, completely different setting than athletes, but at the end of the day, everyone is human. So whether they're applying the skills day to day while they're at work in the army, or whether outside of work, I've seen people apply it, um, in a vast majority of settings. But above all, everyone has the goal of being a better person, whether that's personal goals, like I said, work goals, even family goals. These skills are transferable. And how you take care of yourself mentally is going to impact others, whether it's coaches, whether it's a parent. So everything in my opinion, it's a working dynamic of these skills. So very beneficial in all areas of life.
Yeah, I love that. And I personally am very glad you do what you do. So,
Me
well,
too.
good. Yes, well, good. So, there are a lot of athletes that come to us when they're struggling, they're stuck,
Right.
they're dealing with a mental block, they've got severe performance anxiety, they've lost their confidence to the point of it's not just a skill they're struggling with, but they don't like their sport anymore. They think they should quit or they're not good enough to continue because they're not going to make the next team or whatever that situation is. They're in a place that's hard, right? And of course, we would love to catch athletes when they're in that like awesome, like I'm doing amazing, but I know I can do better. But
Right.
we do see a lot of athletes that are struggling. So, what would you say to an athlete that has maybe given up hope? Like they're at the point where they're like, I don't know if I can overcome this. Like, what would you say to athletes that believe that they're not going to overcome what they're going through?
I think it really boils down to, I mean, there's a lot of things that are definitely involved with that question, but I feel like bottom line, the word never is very powerful. I would also say the word always is very powerful. And so to me, that's very, I would label it as like negative self talk in a way, because when an athlete has those thoughts of, I'm never going to get over, whether it's a block or whether it's a challenge, whatever the case may be, um, from our standpoint as mental coaches, we know that our thoughts influence how we behave, what we start to believe, and overall the impact of that. And in this case, or the overall outcome would be, am I overcoming this challenge or am I not overcoming this challenge? So having that frame of mind kind of feeds this negative feedback loop of, if an athlete thinks they're not going to overcome something without the proper tools and support, unfortunately they might not, just because at that point they don't know any better, they don't have the tools. Whereas with something as, switching it to something more positive, or I would say maybe even more just helpful or productive in that moment, it can change that feedback loop. So, something more positive of, I'm not where I want to be yet and I'm working through it. In an athlete's brain, that switches it to something that again is more positive, more helpful, but they'll start to believe that, and then they'll start to behave in ways that align with what they're thinking, what they're believing, and you're changing the path of that athlete's outcome. So more so you're shifting it towards not going for their skills or tumbling or stunt, whatever the case is. More so you're aligning them in a way, or they're aligning themselves in a way that's more um, towards the outcome of overcoming what challenges, or being even more open to working through those challenges, because change can be difficult for athletes um, to think about. As frustrating as it is, our brains are wired to think a certain way, for our whole life. And so all of a sudden now we tell athletes, oh, I want you to think about your thinking, or I want you to change how you're thinking. It's hard, right? Even for myself, it's hard to change the way you think. But really getting athletes to help them through that process. Sometimes it's the smallest tweaks in language that have the biggest impact. So while some things are I will say, bigger changes. It doesn't always have to be. Any small tweak can have the largest impact, I would say. So I would boil it down to how an athlete is talking about or talking to themselves or about their skills, their sport. Um, and I would also say, I touched on it a little bit before, but overall mindset, as you had mentioned, um, some athletes get so frustrated that they're considering throwing in the towel. They're considering quitting their sport. Some of it aligns with how as an athlete, like, do they want to change? Do they want to get better? Do they want to figure out a solution or meet with someone to try and figure out what's going on? Which from our standpoint, we provide that support, of course. But athletes, it's helpful if they can understand that and meet us in the middle with that. Because I could want to help an athlete all day long. That's what we do. I love doing it, but I can, nudge a little bit, but a lot of it, and we talk a lot about awareness and ownership. That's not awareness and ownership for me. That's awareness and ownership for the athletes. And of course, we'll help them get there, but a lot of it stems from the athlete themselves and what they want to do with their sport and their progression and their skills.
I love that. And I love that you clarified early on with the difference between just being positive, like trying to be more positive, because a lot of athletes, they try to be positive, but it's almost like they're faking it. And it's more so for other people. It's because they are disappointed in themselves, but they don't want other people to be disappointed, right? And so they're faking it and trying to be more positive, but it's crushing because they still feel that frustration and they feel that disappointment on the inside either way, right? So I love that you switch that to something just being more helpful in your and more thoughtful in your thinking, right? Like there are more helpful patterns that do create those more positive belief systems. Absolutely. And what we see a lot of the times is when they're in that stuck place and they want to give up and they want to quit their sport, it's not because they really want to, it's because they don't think they have what it takes to get back to where they feel like they need to
Right.
be. So there's some reprogramming that needs to happen. But I think that's super helpful to all of that wisdom you just shared, I think is really helpful for athletes that might be in that stuck place. But